China EVs and more, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. One rule: we appreciate vigorous debate, but let's all be considerate and respectful to each other. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. Even if it sounds like investment advice, it isn't. We encourage those who enjoy this room to please connect with us on LinkedIn, get the word out to your friends, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li, and I'm the Managing Director at Sino-Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Lei Xing, and I am the former chief editor of China Auto Review, which published newsletters and the only tabloid magazine in English, focused exclusively on the Chinese auto market. Pre-pandemic, I spent pretty much 20 years on the ground in China covering the industry. Since the pandemic, I've been in the US as an independent analyst consultant, looking afar and still trying to keep tabs on the rapidly evolving market. This is our big 50 episode. So
I feel so old.
Meaning that we've done this on either Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces for 50 weeks in a row. So that's going to be roughly 5,000 minutes of discussion on China EVs, AVs, and mobility. So just reading off the headlines, obviously the topic today is the CATL's EVOGO battery swap solution. I think it's going to be our primary topic today, but just reading off some of the recent headlines. For example, today, the CATL Lyric first pre-production vehicle rolled off the assembly line at the Spring Hill facility in the U.S. So that's the one where they had this...
The Saturn factory.
Yeah,
the Saturn
the $2 billion investment was announced in October 2020. Luminar, following the Volvo tie-up, is now working with Mercedes-Benz to develop automated driving technologies and deploy luminous LiDAR on upcoming Mercedes vehicles. That's interesting.
It's quickly becoming mainstream, LiDAR on vehicles,
yeah,
right?
And Mercedes-Benz is using, I believe, Valio's Scala LiDAR on the new S-Class, I believe, for the level 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And then that new Ford Mondeo that I tweeted actually got a lot of attention, and it seems positively received. I guess a lot of U.S. people here wish they had it, right? And it seems that Ford... it seems Ford has been hitting the ball out of the park with some of the recent designs, heavily locally led designs like the EVOS and the Lincoln Z, now with the new Mondeo, right?
Let me add a couple things to this. So the Mondeo, the EVOS, and the Lincoln Zephyr Reflection are supposed to have been primarily designed in China. The Lincoln Zephyr is a China-only model, and the Mondeo is rumored to be the replacement potentially for the Ford Fusion in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So Americans still might see it, but as the Fusion. And one head scratcher a little bit, and I'm getting really, really technical, I'm being very, what's the right word? I can't even come with, but the designer that was quoted in an article that I was reading about the Mondeo actually lives in Australia. So I don't know what parts of the vehicle were primarily designed in China. Maybe the UX, maybe the interior, but I need to talk to my Ford folks to really get a better understanding of what was designed in China for China, because, technically Australia is still Asia, but I wouldn't call that designed in China.
Well, heavily influenced with China.
Yes.
Right. So
I was,
mhm,
So technically,
yeah. And then Pony AI just unveiled their 6th generation robotaxi using the Toyota Sienna, utilizing a new design, and also announcing their own computing unit, again with NVIDIA's Orin SoC, right? That was something that just came out today. And interesting, the Hi-Fi brand, they produced their 5000th Hi-Fi X, and they also put this injunction on one of the Renault subsidiaries in Germany for I checked and that Renault's Mobilize mobility brand did have a logo that is, let's just say, a bit too close for comfort. And
I think it was turned like 30 degrees, right?
So,
it's basically the same logo, it's just turned 30 degrees.
So, hats off to Hi-Fi for spotting this and doing something.
It's like it's like your logo being a plus and then me turning it, so now it's an X.
Yeah. And
right?
Also this...
It's just lazy. Just seems kind of lazy.
Also this past week, so Toyota had their 1.5 millionth hybrid sale in China. This is after 15 years on the market, when in 2005, the Prius was introduced. So that was an interesting statistic. And Stellantis Group just celebrated 1 year after being, formed.
The one thing I will also tell you is that Hi-Fi is rumored to be getting ready to IPO later this year in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I've also
targeting
heard
to raise about half $500 million.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing is this entire move, transition, evolution from wanting to go public in the US to transitioning over to Shanghai Star or Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of an important distinction, because currently, in this too, Lei, Hi-Fi is like Blue Ocean. They're the only domestic premium electric vehicle brand that's, rooted in China. Now they have global ambitions, and they're going to be launching a more sportier coupe later this year. I think it's called the Z, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, there's the Z. And so it's more cutting edge, more digital than the Hi-Fi X. For those that have not seen it, just Google Hi-Fi Z. It's actually, there are aspects to it, elements that I like about it, but it seems a bit too cutting edge for me. But wanted to also note that Hi-Fi is looking to go public this year too.
Yeah, they're definitely in a league of its own, and I call them the GM gang, because a lot of their executives were previously working at Shanghai GM. Ding Lei, he was the Shanghai GM president for many years, and Phil Murtaugh.
And he was an advisor for Faraday. You had mentioned that in the previous pod,
Phil
right?
Murtaugh, the former GM China president. He's very low key. I'm not sure if he's still there, but he was involved at the very beginning. And I actually met him when they launched the brand in summer 2019, July 31st, if I remember correctly, 2019, when they launched the concept. So, yeah. I guess we can talk about CATL. It's probably the biggest news of the week and of the year so far, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let me throw some numbers out there real quick before we start talking swapping. So CATL is also trying to raise more money. They believe currently that they have a shortfall by 2025 of 430 gigawatt hours of delta between supply and demand. So they're trying to raise more money to increase capacity. And last year, from January to September, they had built 160 gigawatt hours worth of battery cells. I mean, that's massive. A gigafactory, so a Tesla gigafactory in Nevada, I think that puts out 40 to 50 gigawatt hours per year. So just to give you some sense of scale, by the end of this year, they should be at 240 gigawatt hours of capacity around the world. And there's a McKinsey report that said, and it's recent, I think it was launched in November of 2021. I was going to send it to you, Lei, and I will do that after this pod. It's an interesting report. There's going to be 3,900 gigawatt hours of demand globally for batteries by 2030. And 2,400 of that gigawatt hours is going to come from electric vehicles. So even if they get to that 600 plus gigawatt hours of capacity by 2025, they're aiming to have almost 25% of the market by 2030. So a lot of capacity is being added in Europe, and the United States has made recent announcements, at least GM and Ford has made recent announcements about really stepping up and accelerating additional capacity investment in Tennessee and Kentucky in particular. So what we're seeing is a quick move into a lot of investment over the next 5, 6, 7 years. McKinsey also said 300 billion euro would need to be invested by 2030 in order to support all the demand globally. So CATL is in the driver's seat right now, and I wanted to give more context. I never understand anything very well until I can relate it to either numbers or something I'm familiar with. So I wanted to give a little bit of background on that.
Right. I wonder the 430 gigawatt hours. I think I saw that note on the investor. I think they had like an investor message board or something.
Well, they had to justify to the Shenzhen Stock Exchange why they wanted to raise additional capital.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two numbers. There's the 430 gigawatt hours, and then I think there was 135 or something, or 100. There was another number that was actually 295, and that's taking away the expected, I think, 135 that they expect to have. So they should said the shortfall was 295. That was another number. But
okay.
You wonder, have they consider the demand or from these battery swap stations? Do you count those into that demand, right? Because I just quickly did a math. The so-called ChocoSeb, the chocolate bar-like,
the cell to pack, yeah,
chocolate bar-like swappable electric blocks, the ChocoSeb, each of them is a 26.5 kilowatt hour, and they have 48 maximum per station. So if you do the simple multiplication, it comes out to be close to 1.3 gigawatt hours, if I did my math correctly. Basically 48 times 26.5, right?
Yeah.
So you wonder whether those shortfall numbers, whatever, the 295 or the 430, would include those or no, because that's just adding on top of the supply and demand, right?
Yes.
So I think that's one of the concerns that in the last episode we talked about that was a concern from Dr. Wallenstein of Volkswagen China, that for them it didn't make sense to invest and put those extra capacity into the world, right?
You're right.
So that was one of the concerns, but now this I think when you have the world's biggest battery cell supplier go into from B2B business model going into a B2C business model of actually facing the end consumers, and own brand, own stations, own app, okay, then that's really saying something about battery swapping. I think this when you have the battery cell suppliers play into it, right?
Yeah.
B2B to B2C, and trying to actually, I guess, the strategy is this closed loop, from all the way from upstream development, raw materials, to the technology, C2P, whatever, to recycling, to the energy, to the grid. And most important thing is
And where
they're 1 to X, not 1 to 1. So there will be,
right.
there are ample, right? One to many. So they said, first 10 cities and many OEMs. The first one being the FAW Best Tune, right? NAT model.
Yes.
But initially, it looks like it'll be for ride-hailing purposes.
Yeah.
And then expand into the private vehicles. So I guess
let's say that they get really good. They're really good at manufacturing, building capacity out on battery cells. They're entering into a B2C, which is customer facing now. So it's a new skill set that they likely don't have in abundance from their management team or anyone significant at the company. So that's a huge thing that they need to invest in, because everything that you had mentioned earlier is all supply chain stuff, all manufacturing, all engineering. But now that you're B2C, you got to have branding, you got to have customers understand it needs to be affordable so that people buy into it. The app needs to be user friendly, and everything needs to work together on the front end. So I think those are the kind of things that I want to see a little bit more about, because they were pretty light on details. The second thing I'll say is that they can't be objective, because before they have many customers on the OEM side. Okay. But now that they're doing this swapping, they'll tell you that they're being objective, but they can't. If I have Lay Motor Company who buys my batteries, who's also using my platform for battery swapping, and two motor company who's buying my batteries but not using my swapping, who do you think they're going to be a bit more service friendly towards? They can't be objective on this. It just doesn't make sense, because why would Lay Motor Company stay with CATL unless there was a preference, right? So this is the thing that they have to balance, and they're already the 800-pound gorilla. So it's intimidating for a lot of OEMs, foreign OEMs and domestic OEMs, to sign up with them anyways. So this complicates things.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that's maybe part of the reason why the capital market wasn't all that positive in terms of a response the day when they announced this, right? Their stock price actually went down a little bit. I think this is the anticipation of some early frictions and kind of conflict of interest. But I think one thing to point out that was important is CATL has this CAES, the Contemporary Amperex Energy Service Technology Limited subsidiary that will run this whole operation. And they are doing something called a battery bank, in which the CAES will be a participant. So almost like the battery asset company with NEO.
Yes.
Right. So somebody has to deal with the asset.
It's like a shell company, so the battery, the assets don't sit on CATL's balance sheet, right?
Yeah. So this is
they keep it clean.
And from what I know, that they didn't announce, for example, battery leasing, how much you will pay for the battery swap, but basically they just said they will charge at a competitive rate depending on the timing and location of where the stations are. And also, I also heard that they will initially use the NMC chemistry, because if you look at those,
so those are expensive batteries.
Yeah, watt-hour numbers: 160 watt-hour per kilogram on a weight basis, and 325 watt-hour per liter on a volume basis, right? And the other interesting thing it seems to be me is the standardized Choco Ceps that it'll be 3 per vehicle. So they have this tier. So 1 is 200 kilometers, 2, 400, 3, 600, and you can, swap either 1, 2, or 3. That's the difference compared to Neo, where Neo is just whole whatever 74 kilowatt hours or 100 kilowatt hours. And they're trying to make it more flexible, right? This is something that was different. And then I guess...
Well, that could mean that they, I see that as making a ton of sense, standardizing the battery pack and then being able to use it on a lot of different form factors. Let's say a commercial vehicle needs 4 battery packs, but a hatchback needs 1. So that makes a ton of sense to me. But on a pricing standpoint, it can't be more than 1,000 RMB a month, right, for a subscription, because Neos cost 1,000 RMB a month. So it can't be more than that, right?
Right. And the other question was this kind of compatibility, what the OEMs have to do to make it compatible. And they said that the OEMs only have to develop a Choco SB compatible battery swapping kind of a frame or a bracket without tweaking the vehicle chassis. So I think CATL is trying to make it as
plug and play.
Yeah, as much as easy on the OEM side.
Sure.
To do this,
they have to. It has to be. It has to be frictionless, right? It needs to be completely frictionless,
right? So the first one is FAW Best Tune, and if you look at, I don't think many people know about Best Tune in the audience. To me, it's a
because
sign.
It's not super popular.
I think it's a sign that we can say that the initial OEM customers are going to be those that are a bit less prominent on EVs. Maybe they would be dependent on CATL and these others to help, to help drive the sales. So
they either don't have the money or they don't have the technology themselves in house, right? Or the time to develop it. So they're using the CATL technology to piggyback to get them into the game.
I heard a very interesting comment from a friend of mine in the industry, and he said instead of CATL supplying the batteries and trying to help the OEMs sell the EVs, he thinks it's the other way around. He thinks it's the OEMs trying to help CATL sell batteries. That was his comment, which I thought was kind of interesting.
We have to remember in the grand scheme of things, right? Let's say, for instance, CATL builds this 430 gigawatt hours of capacity, or an additional 430 gigawatt hours of capacity. And remember, I am always cognizant of overcapacity in China. It's happened in a few different important sectors, steel and solar panels, to major industries. And with all this investment, especially if CATL has a ton of capacity, if you have 20-30% of global capacity, you control pricing, or you can at least dictate pricing or influence pricing substantially. Okay, so if they wanted to add market share, they undercut everybody. And so the concern is that, or the caution is that, if there's a disruptive technology that all of a sudden makes and let's say it's the 80-20 rule. So these factories, 600 gigawatt hour factory, global capacity, primarily makes LFP batteries. If there's a disruptive technology that makes LFP batteries less efficient or more inefficient or obsolete, what's going to happen with that capacity, right? They're going to dump it, and they're going to reduce costs substantially to make people want to keep using LFP batteries, because that new technology is going to be pretty expensive. So, I think I have a concern that we go short term from not enough battery supply to long term 15 years out to where it's like, wow, man, there's so many battery factories, right? Because you and I know in China, there are a lot of manufacturing capacity for ICEs that are either off book, or the only reason the plant and factory is open is to employ that 800 or 1,200 people that are building this car that only the provincial or the province buys. So these are just things, food for thought for everyone to think about. Right now, we're not that concerned about supply and demand meeting that supply, or demand or supply meeting the demand. But long term, these are the things we have to think about.
And for the EVOGO solution, two things. One is chemistry agnostic. So it will be NMC in the beginning, but they will also use LFP. And two, it's brand agnostic. So meaning serving multiple OEMs and brands, right? And speaking of the OEMs, I think it's worth mentioning that NIO, when you watch the press conference, it was only 10 minutes, right? When you watch what they said and how they presented it, I felt it was a bit deja vu, because I felt like it was NIO who was doing the presentation, because this has been already existing. And that's why the president of the NIO, a battery swap asset company, he posted a WeChat comment, and he said basically, look, we've done this for 6 years, and rechargeable, upgradable, swappable. Whatever CATL said only cements our strategy, and that it worked. So, and this is, and he said it nicely. He just said,
he had to say that.
Yeah, he said, this is good for the battery swapping. We welcome it. We're happy. But I think CATL, being a shareholder in NIO's battery asset management company, I'm sure, one, they have learned a thing or two about battery swapping, right? And two, there must be an understanding between CATL and NIO for this, that CATL is, right, going on a tangent.
But this is the thing. This is where, if I'm wearing my NIO hat, that one advantage that I had that was really, really customer friendly, because I reduced the price of all my vehicles by 70,000 RMB because I do battery swapping. So if they get let's say CATL, there's a mass market swapping station, and then there's a premium swapping station, so they can up-brand or co-brand, sub-brand, whatever. Now my premium partners can also undercut or reduce pricing. So the competitive advantage that I had for battery swapping, if I'm NIO, that might have gone away, because a Cadillac, and I'm making all this stuff up, but conceivably there could be another premium automaker that is competing directly with NIO, saying, you know what, I'm going to offer a swap and a battery lease using CATL's platform and infrastructure and reduce the price of my vehicle by 70,000 RMB. What do you think about that, NIO? That can't make them feel good.
Right. So the thing basically is, it's a lot easier for CATL to serve multiple customers than NIO, who, though they've said that their battery swapping could be open to other OEMs, but it's probably not as easy as CATL maybe. And also, but on the flip side, if we look at this is part of the details that were not announced too much. So they have these OEMs they're planning to work with 10 cities. What is going to be the cadence? Is it going to be, we're going to open up one station every month? You see what I'm saying? Whereas NIO, they already have 800 station, right? Probably, I think 800, probably around 800 swap stations. So they're kind of, if you talk about it competitively, then NIO is still far ahead. And how fast these other OEMs catch on, I'm sure there's already been agreements signed. It's just the first.
Without question. Yeah, without question.
It's just that Bestune was the first to be announced. But you wonder, right? Last episode we talked about nearly 1,300 total battery swap stations, and NIO has the bulk of them, right? You wonder, the cadence of the rollout. I don't know. It might not be significant this year, but at least I think, I wrote an article. Basically, my conclusion was that swapping is not going to work for everyone, but CATL's move is going to speed up the swapping revolution. There's no doubt about it.
At least in China. At least in China.
Yeah, at least in China. So
the other thing too that is a wild card is they could be sitting down with Sinopec or one of the domestic oil companies, or even Shell or Royal Dutch.
NIO is already working with them.
Yeah,
right?
But if I'm Shell, hopefully I didn't sign an exclusive, right, where I can only work with NIO, because why wouldn't I have this conversation? Because there's not going to be as many NIO cars as probably this CATL EVOGO swapping partner number of vehicles, right? So it wouldn't make sense for Shell to only use NIO as a battery swapping partner. So one of the things that you and I, we should figure out more about and maybe update everyone next week is how the actual battery swapping stations work. The other thing that I think is important to note is that I believe CATL squeezed in that there's a requirement to use their BMS as well, their battery management system. And I would argue that one of Tesla's big advantages, being vertically integrated and creating most of the software they develop and launch in-house, is their battery management system is much better than any traditional legacy OEM. So, and they keep that data on in-house as well, right? So if I need to use CATL's BMS, they're going to have so much information about many different OEMs' electric vehicles. So I think that's worth noting, because there's always that data play now, right? We always got to think about that data play. And it creates even more of an advantage, because now the software can be developed for the 80-20 rule, right? 90% of the cars are optimized using our software, or whatever number of OEMs they can initially sign up, right? So I think these are the kind of the implications that I've kind of thought through a little bit. And really quickly, you had mentioned Ample, their stations are actually really cool, because they have intelligent software that actually, and their packs are standardized as well. They only have 6 or 7 swapping stations in the US, but the batteries are charged in the swapping stations, and the software understands and can control the speed of the recharging, so that they're sure to use power from the grid that when it's not expensive. So I don't think NIO or CATL has that level of intelligence in their swapping stations yet. You and I had traded WeChats earlier because I thought that they need to deliver charged batteries into these swapping stations. They don't charge themselves in the stations. So that can happen in China because labor is cheaper. But in an expensive country, that's completely impractical, right?
Mm-hmm. And if remember correctly, the Ample's model is swapping all the battery modules,
yes,
rather than the whole battery pack. So that's another slightly different play. Anyhow, more questions than answers, definitely, right?
Agreed.
Yeah, tons of questions that we probably are not going to be able to answer and see how this plays out.
I would argue CATL can't answer them until they get 1 or 2 anchor customers or clients, right? Because they'll need to accommodate specific requirements.
Yeah, the other thing is whether we'll see one of the foreign brands do this, right? Is that a possibility?
I think so. So you had mentioned
it could be
earlier.
Possible.
Well, you had mentioned earlier in the pod that NIO talked about the possibility of licensing their swapping technology. Before the CATL announcement, it was an offensive play. Now, after the CATL announcement, it's a defensive play,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my eyes. So
Yeah.
I bet they've already had initial conversations with some of these other premium automakers, maybe Hi-Fi, and said, let's do this. But, they're in no hurry to sign anybody up. And I'm sure the premium EV makers are, taking a step back, concentrating on ramp rather than, battery swapping. That's to me, for a lot of those companies, it's still a nice to have as opposed to this is a necessary qualifier for selling product into the market. So,
Mm-hmm.
so we are at 1040 lay. Let's keep on talking, but we will now open the room up to questions, comments, and insight, because you all probably know about as much as we do about this battery swapping stuff for CATL. So if you have heard or read anything that can add to the story, we are open to listening.
Yeah. And the other thing, to the other topic is the Jidu. They had launched a new logo and a teaser for the upcoming concept, right? The car robot.
Right.
Which had the pop-up lidars, it seemed.
Yeah.
On top of the headlights, it looked like. And the Pixel J logo was a bit interesting. I kept looking at it, and it's very unorthodox. You can't really, it's a J and a half D, right? The letter D, but cut off, and then a J. And then I went to look at some of the other logos. Go compare Jidu's new logo with Li Auto and NIO. You might find some similarities if you stare at them long enough.
Maybe it's the same design agency. Maybe it's the same brand identity.
Yeah, same thought behind this, whatever you want to call it, Pixel.
These are clear breadcrumbs for Jidu being very digital, very, very technology.
Digital, different, yeah. And the way, if you look at their announcements, every time they make announcement, at the top of the announcement, they say, this is day number 324. This is day number 350. Nobody does that, right? Keep counting how many days is passed since they were founded.
No, but that's to me that's digital. Compelling stuff, right? That's just compelling stuff. You and I are just nerds, so we get into that stuff. But I would love to see the 5-minute clips by department of what's going on there, right? The design decisions, the business decisions,
And I think the other important things when this concept is revealed in April, the production version, at least from what they say now, will be 90%. This concept will be about 90% showing what the final production vehicle will be. That's what they're communicating.
So another way of saying that is 90% design frozen, right? So
so this is really fast, right? March 2021. So a year later, they're going to reveal the concept. And let's say another year, it's going to be launched. So 2 years from the company forming to launching a product.
That indicates to me that they may be doing a lot of partnerships, maybe a platform partner, maybe.
Well, Geely's SEA platform, right? It's already there. So.
And their logo, I have 2 young boys. Their logo reminds me of Gran Turismo logo.
Oh,
the video game. So look at it, Lei, because you have a daughter, so maybe she doesn't get into the whole, racing.
She's
games,
more of a Minecraft.
No gender roles with Minecraft for sure. But take a look at GT because it's very blocky, and it does represent letters, but it's a little blocky. So April's going to be such a big month. Or late March, early April, because there's going to be a lot more revealed. One thing we did hear about, Lei, is from a friend of ours. He was at a secret. I don't know if it's secret. Let's just call it secret. Lotus SUV unveiling in Shanghai this week.
Yeah, nobody. I didn't see anything on the Chinese media or in the international media.
So they're moving forward.
It must have been the Type 132, so their first
Yes.
locally produced SUV, which the official reveal is supposed to be in the springtime.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what this event was. Maybe there was a preview for internal preview for VIPs or something.
Yeah, so our friend is
I wonder
a
how come
special
you didn't
guy.
go.
Our friend is a special guy, right? So
So,
I asked him
yeah.
to leak us some photos, but let's see what he comes back with.
Yeah.
And a couple things about the Lotus SUV. First of all, it's going to be built in Wuhan, so I think it's
Yeah,
going to be
we
the
talked about
first
that. Yeah.
Lotus vehicle built outside of the UK, and it's an SUV, following in the footsteps of Lamborghini, Aston Martin, who else? Rolls Royce and Bentley. Those are the high runners. You know, Porsche didn't double, triple sales until they launched the Cayenne and the Macan, right? So you got to be there. Unfortunately, there are some traditionalists in the UK that are probably turning in their graves when they heard about Lotus building an SUV. But Lotus has never been very well managed, so they've always had cash problems. So, so I think Geely allowing them this platform investment and then being able to utilize some of their technology is going to help Lotus, at least in China. You know, they still have operations in the UK where their supercars and sports cars are going to be designed and built, but the mass market stuff is going to be dedicated to China initially. So, does anyone have any questions or comments? I know Clinton, you had raised your hand earlier. What else happened this week, Lay?
No, I guess on the policy side, just to add a few, is the reiteration from the Minister of Information and Industry and Information Technology. He basically said the purchase tax for NEVs, which is currently exempt, the 10% purchase tax, which is exempt, and the exemption was supposed to end at the end of this year, but it looks like he's hinting that it will continue.
Okay.
Next year. And the NDRC just came out with a document promotion plan for green development, which had a lot of fluffy stuff on NEV support. You know, basically the same things that have been talked about.
So for our listeners, there are currently two types of incentives, one for the automaker and one for the buyer. The automaker has historically received a subsidy for the sale of an electric vehicle. So companies like BYD, NIO, they get a check written to them by the government for every EV they sell. And there was that announcement earlier or late last year that said they're going to eliminate that subsidy completely by the end of this year. Okay, so but that was that the buyer took advantage of that because the overall MSRP got reduced by that subsidy, but it was actually given to the OEM. And so there were a couple of years, I think BYD made $1 billion US because of how many cars they sold and the subsidy that they received for the cars that they sold. And then on the customer side, if you purchased an EV, that 10% VAT would be waived. And Lei, you tell me if I'm wrong, but those are the two enablers for over the last several years to encourage EV adoption here in China. The EU, the European countries have combinations of both. There's no one size fits all answer at the country level in Europe. So there's a combination of subsidy and then elimination or the waiving of the VAT for EV adoption in Europe. And then the United States, which is a little weird because of the union stuff, you get more money, I believe, $7,500 versus $12,000 or $12,000 versus $7,500 if your vehicle that is purchased is manufactured by a union factory. So, which GM and Ford are smiling because it makes their Silverado their most expensive products, generally speaking, much more attractive because it's an extra $5,000 versus a Tesla, which would get the $7,500 credit, unless the 200,000 unit cap is carried over. I actually don't know if that starts from zero again, or I need to find that out.
But basically, the subsidies are ending seriously this year, but the purchase tax exemption could continue in 2023. So that's the policy side for this year's market.
And we'll see. There was already happening. We'll see price adjustments because of the subsidies going away.
Sure. But I think regardless, we said the tipping point has gone past. I think short term there'll be some, right? Probably a jump this year. The last hurrah, right? But going forward in the long term, I think the market has been educated enough, and people are not going to not buy NEVs because the subsidies are gone or because the purchase tax are gone.
It seems it sounds like they're still being a bit conservative if they're going to keep that VAT waiver in place. So
yeah,
they still see a few cracks, and they're trying to make sure that the momentum stays positive. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at Leixing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.